The story begins in a small-town restaurant where a young waitress worked quietly every day. She had been working there for almost 2 years now, ever since she left school and moved away from her childhood home. People came and went from the restaurant constantly. So many faces, so many voices, so many stories. Yet she felt invisible most of the time. She was simply the girl who carried plates, took orders, smiled politely, and cleaned tables. The customers knew little about her life, and even her co-workers only knew what they saw on the surface every morning she walked to the restaurant. Through the same narrow street with old shops and fruit stalls. She walked slowly, not because she wanted to be late, but because she liked to look at everything around her. The buildings were worn down, the road was uneven, cars honked loudly. But somewhere in all that noise, she could always hear music in her mind. It was like every sound around her created a rhythm that only she could notice. She often imagined fingers moving across piano keys. Even when her hands were holding coffee mugs or a tray full of breakfast plates, she grew up with music. Her childhood home had been filled with sounds of old songs. And there had once been a second-hand piano placed against the living room wall. She used to sit there every evening, playing small melodies she learned from a music teacher in her school. Piano lessons were her favorite part of childhood. They made her feel alive, ready, confident. But life changed fast, and not always in kind ways. Her family was never wealthy, but they managed fine for a long time. Then her father lost work. Her mother fell ill for a period, and bills piled up. Piano lessons were the first thing she had to give up because they cost more than the family could afford. She cried for days after her teacher gently told her they could not continue. She tried playing on her own, teaching herself new pieces. But her teenage years were heavy, and she slowly drifted away from the piano. Eventually, she left home and moved to the town where she now lived, working in the restaurant to help support herself. Still, music never left her heart. In the late hours of the night, when the town fell silent, she would lie awake listening to old recordings on her phone, imagining that she was playing those songs on a grand piano in front of a listening crowd. She could almost feel the keys beneath her fingers. But dreams like that did not pay rent or buy food. So she kept them tucked inside and worked. The restaurant was busy from lunch until evening. Tables were always full, especially on weekends. Most people who visited the place belonged to the upper class. They came wearing fancy clothes and expensive watches. They ordered costly meals, tipped a little sometimes, complained loudly other times. They rarely spoke to her beyond the basic words, "Water please, more napkins, bill." Some customers were friendly and she was grateful for them, but others treated her as if she did not matter. Sometimes a customer would speak without looking at her face. Sometimes one would joke about waitresses being slow or careless, and though they never named her, the words hurt. She learned to smile through everything, because the job required politeness. Her coworkers were a mixed group. Some were older workers who had been there for years and no longer cared much about anything. Others were younger like her, full of dreams, working only until something better came along. She got along with most of them, but she rarely spoke about herself. Very few people knew she once had talent in piano. It felt like sharing that would only make people laugh or ask for proof. She did not want to risk that embarrassment. One day, the restaurant brought in a new decoration to attract more customers. It was a shining black piano placed right near the center of the dining area. When it arrived, everyone gathered around to look at it. The surface was polished, the keys clean and smooth. It looked expensive. It's the kind of piano she had only seen in music schools and concert halls. She stood behind everyone, watching silently. Her heart beat faster than usual because seeing the piano reminded her of everything she missed. She wondered how it would feel to sit down again and try to play. She wondered if the years away had taken all her skills. She wondered whether she could still remember the songs she once learned as a child. Her co-workers reacted differently. One of the cooks joked that the restaurant had become a concert hall. Another worker said the piano was just for show, that nobody there could play anyway. The manager proudly told them that customers liked live music and that soon they might hire musicians to entertain the wealthy clients. The waitress stayed quiet, staring at the keys while everyone else talked. For a moment, she imagined sitting at that piano during a calm night, playing softly. She imagined customers stopping to listen. She imagined applause, like the kind she had dreamed about for years. Then she remembered where she was, looked around, and forced herself to walk away from the piano later that day while cleaning a table near the piano. She lightly touched one of the keys and listened to the faint sound it made. Her hand shook with emotion. She wanted to play, even just for a minute, but she knew if somebody saw her, they might tease her. She also feared that people might ask her to perform on the spot. What if she failed? What if she made mistakes? The fear of embarrassment felt bigger than her desire to play. Several customers started noticing the piano. Some tried hitting random keys and laughed at themselves. Some asked the manager when someone would play it. One group of customers, sitting at a table near the front window, pointed at the waitress and whispered to each other. She pretended not to notice, but she had already learned what whispers usually meant. That evening, after closing time, when everyone else had gone to the back rooms, she looked at the piano again. The lights were dim, music played from the speakers, and she was alone in the dining area. She stood beside the piano, staring at its shiny black surface reflecting her face. It made her feel small and powerful at the same time. She raised her hand slowly, as if afraid the piano would shout if she touched it again. Her fingers pressed 3 keys together, making a soft chord. It sounded warm and familiar. Something inside her broke open, memories flooded her mind. And she sat down at the stool before she even realized she had done it. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She placed both hands on the keys. For a moment, she froze, unable to begin anything. The room felt too quiet, too empty, too full of ghosts. Her childhood teacher's voice came back to her. Breathe first. Always breathe before the first note. She did. She breathed in deeply, closed her eyes, and let her fingers move. The first sound she made was shaky, imperfect, but still beautiful. Her fingers pushed the keys slowly, remembering patterns she had forgotten she knew. She played only a tiny part of a song she once loved. The notes felt heavy, like she was pulling them out from deep inside her. But after a moment, she stopped, afraid someone would hear. She stood quickly and walked away from the piano, her heart racing. She wanted more. She needed courage she did not yet have. The next morning, she came back to work, early because she could not stop thinking about the piano. As she tied her apron, she tried to focus on her tasks. She needed to refill the salt containers, wipe the tables, and arrange the plates. But the piano kept calling to her mind like a voice she could not ignore. Customers began to arrive. The first group was a family celebrating a birthday. They were loud but happy. They laughed, argued over menu choices, and made jokes about portion sizes. The waitress smiled politely and served them carefully. But while she worked, her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. A few hours later, an older man came in alone and sat at a table near the piano. He was gentle-looking, with soft eyes and a warm smile. When she brought him his water, he noticed her glance at the piano again. "You like music?" he asked kindly. She hesitated, unsure what to say. She did not usually talk about her interests with customers, but something in his tone made her feel safe. "Yes," she whispered. "I used to play." The man smiled and nodded. "You should play again," he said. "Talent never truly leaves a person." His words surprised her. She wanted to respond, maybe even tell him how much she missed playing. But a coworker called her name, and she left the table quickly. The man continued smiling at her every time she passed his table, as if he understood something the rest of the world did not. Later that day, a group of young diners sat near the piano. They noticed the waitress looking at it again, and began whispering to each other. One of them asked loudly, "Do you want to try playing it?" His voice held laughter under the question. His friend smirked. They were not curious. They were mocking. The waitress simply smiled politely and walked away without answering. Her face burned with embarrassment. She felt foolish for looking at the piano while working, but the old man at the other table frowned at the group. He watched the waitress leave and then looked toward the piano himself. The kindness in his eyes returned, and he folded his arms as if thinking deeply about her situation. She worked through the rest of the afternoon, trying not to let the comments bother her. But inside, she remembered every word. She remembered every laugh. She remembered every whisper. The piano became a silent challenge to her existence. It reminded her who she once was and who she wanted to be. Yet every time she thought about touching it, she heard imaginary laughter in her mind. She wondered if anyone would ever believe she had talent. She wondered if anyone cared. That night, when the restaurant closed, she stayed for a few minutes again just to stare at the piano. She told herself she would not touch it. She would only look. But her hands lifted toward the keys anyway. She played a single note, soft, careful, trembling, and listened as the sound filled the empty room. It made her smile. It made her cry. It made her feel alive. She whispered to the piano, though she knew it sounded silly, one day. One day she would gather enough courage to play a full song, not just a single note. One day she would stop letting fear guide her. One day she would prove to herself, and maybe to the world, that she was more than just a waitress with tired feet and aching wrists. For now. Though, the first part of her story was about silence, struggle, and quiet dreams. Nobody around her knew what she truly carried inside her. Nobody knew the talent she hid, but soon they would, because life has a strange way of pushing hidden talent toward the light. And that piano sitting in the middle of the restaurant was waiting for her. She just needed the bravery to sit down and play. The next morning, the restaurant was busier than usual. She arrived early, carrying her worn bag and the same tired shoes that had seen too many steps in the past few years. The piano sat in the corner as always, its polished black surface shining under the soft morning light. She paused at the doorway for a moment, letting her eyes rest on it, remembering how she had touched a key the night before. That single note had changed something inside her. She could not stop thinking about it. As she tied her apron, she tried to focus on her work. There were tables to clean, chairs to straighten, and menus to arrange. Customers were already coming in, some familiar faces, some strangers, all of them expecting her to serve with a smile. She moved with practiced precision, taking orders, refilling drinks, and balancing plates with ease. Her body moved almost automatically. But her mind kept wandering back to the piano. She wondered how it would feel to play again in front of others. She imagined the sound of the keys beneath her fingers, the music filling the restaurant, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to dream of applause. Then, she remembered the whispers and laughter from the day before. Some young diners had noticed her glancing at the piano and had whispered to each other, pointing and giggling. She tried to push the memory away, but it lingered in her mind like a shadow. During her morning shift, a group of wealthy customers came in, laughing and joking loudly. They noticed her as she walked by to serve their table. One of them, a man with a loud voice and a mocking smile, leaned back in his chair and asked, "Hey, can you play that piano over there? Or is that too much for someone like you?" Her heart stopped for a moment. She forced a smile and said nothing, quickly walking away. Her hand shook slightly as she carried a tray of drinks. She wanted to run and hide, but she reminded herself that she had to stay calm. She could not let them see her fear. Her coworkers noticed the exchange. Some of them laughed quietly at the comment, thinking it was just a joke. One of the older waitresses whispered, "Don't even think about touching it. They'll make fun of you." She nodded silently. But inside, a fire was starting to grow. The mocking words hurt, yes, but they also stirred something she had forgotten: her love for music. She remembered the way her fingers used to glide across the keys, the way melodies could rise and fall in her hands. She remembered the feeling of control and freedom that music had given her. During a brief pause in the lunch rush, she stood near the piano, just looking at it. She imagined herself sitting down, playing a piece she had learned years ago. Her hands trembled slightly at the thought, but she could feel the music inside her, waiting to come out. Later in the afternoon, the same group of young diners returned. They noticed her looking at the piano again and began whispering among themselves. One of them said loudly enough for her to hear, "She thinks she can play. Let's see her embarrass herself." The others laughed, and she felt a wave of humiliation. She looked away and returned to serving tables, her face hot with embarrassment. Despite the teasing, she could not stop thinking about the piano. Every time she passed it, her fingers itched to touch the keys. Every time she served a table, she imagined the melody she could play. She wanted to show them that she was more than just a waitress, more than the person they assumed she was. But fear held her back. What if she failed? What if they laughed even harder? What if she ruined her chance to ever play again? During a quiet moment, the kind, elderly man from the previous day returned. He noticed her lingering near the piano and smiled gently. "You've been thinking about it," he said softly. She hesitated, unsure how much to say. I used to play," she admitted quietly. He nodded knowingly. "I can see it in your eyes. Don't let their words stop you. Talent like yours doesn't just disappear." His words struck her deeply. She wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there, a heavy weight pressing against her chest. She nodded silently and walked away, trying to focus on her duties. But the old man's encouragement lingered, like a small light in a dark room. As the day went on, more customers noticed her glancing at the piano. Some were curious, some amused, and some skeptical. She could feel their eyes on her, judging her silently. It made her nervous, but it also made her think. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to show them who she really was, even if it meant risking embarrassment. Her shift ended late in the evening. The restaurant was emptying, and the staff began cleaning up. She stayed behind for a few minutes, looking at the piano again. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. She could feel the music calling her, whispering to her fingers to play. She took a deep breath and sat down at the stool. Her hands hovered over the keys, hesitant, trembling. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the songs she had loved as a child. Slowly, she pressed a key. The sound echoed in the empty room. She pressed another, and then another. The notes were shaky at first, but as she continued, her confidence grew. The music began to flow through her fingers naturally. She remembered the patterns, the rhythms, the melodies. It was as if the years away from the piano had never happened. She played a simple song, one she had learned long ago, letting the music fill the space around her. The notes were soft at first, then stronger, more confident. She did not notice the time passing. She was lost in the music, in the feeling of creation, in the freedom that only playing could bring. The fear and embarrassment that had held her back melted away with every note. For the first time in years, she felt alive, fully alive. In a way that no job or responsibility could ever give her. Suddenly, she heard a sound from the doorway. She opened her eyes to see a small group of people watching her, their mouths slightly open in surprise. It included the young diners who had mocked her earlier. Their laughter was gone, replaced by wide-eyed amazement. She felt a rush of panic. Had she played too loudly? Had she drawn too much attention to herself? But then she realized something. She did not care. The music was hers, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. She continued playing, letting the melody rise and fall with emotion. The notes carried her feelings, her dreams, her years of longing. The room seemed to hold its breath, listening to her play after a few minutes. She stopped, her hands hovering over the keys. The room was silent. Then, slowly, one person clapped, then another. The clapping grew louder until the entire small audience was applauding her. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had never known before. Pride, joy, and relief, all at once. The young diners who had mocked her earlier looked at each other, their expressions a mix of shock and embarrassment. They had expected failure, but what they had witnessed was skill, passion, and beauty. One of them muttered, "I didn't know she could play like that." The elderly man who had encouraged her smiled broadly, his eyes shining. "See," he said gently, "I told you. Talent never disappears." Her co-workers arrived to see what had caused the applause. Some of them looked surprised, others impressed. The older waitress who had warned her earlier stepped closer and whispered, I didn't think you could play like that. That was incredible." She smiled softly, still catching her breath. "Thank you," she whispered. She did not feel like a waitress at that moment. She felt like the person she had always wanted to be. The person she had hidden inside for so long. From that day on, things began to change. People in the restaurant started noticing her differently. Some customers asked if she could play the piano again. Some coworkers began to treat her with more respect, realizing there was more to her than they had ever imagined. And she herself began to believe in her own talent again, feeling a spark of hope that had been missing for years. That night, as she walked home, she could still hear the music in her mind. She smiled, knowing that the piano had not just been an instrument. It had been a doorway to her true self. She had been mocked, teased, and doubted, but she had found the courage to play anyway. And in doing so, she had discovered something priceless, that her talent, her passion, and her dreams were worth fighting for. No matter what anyone else said, and deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the restaurant felt different. She arrived earlier than usual, her steps light, but her heart heavy with anticipation. Something inside her had shifted after yesterday's small performance. Even though only a few people had watched her play, the memory of their surprised faces and the applause lingered like sunlight after a storm. She tied her apron carefully, smoothing her hair, and walked into the kitchen with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The piano sat in its corner, silent, shining under the morning lights. She stopped for a moment, staring at it. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, but she remembered the words of the elderly man from yesterday. Talent never disappears. He had believed in her before she had fully believed in herself. She swallowed, took a deep breath, and approached the piano. As she neared, a few customers glanced her way. She noticed them whispering, pointing at the piano, wondering if she was going to play. Her stomach tightened. What if she failed this time? What if the laughter she had feared returned, louder than before? Her coworker came by to refill the water glasses. "Are you really going to play?" he asked, eyebrows raised. There was a mixture of curiosity and skepticism in his voice. She nodded silently. I want to try," she said softly. Her voice surprised even her. Lunch hour started, the restaurant filled with chatter, clinking plates, and the occasional shout from the kitchen. She moved quickly between tables, serving customers with practiced skill. Yet every time she passed the piano, her eyes went to the keys, imagining her fingers moving across them, bringing music to life. By mid-afternoon, the restaurant had quieted slightly. A few tables remained occupied, but most customers were finishing their meals. The manager walked by, noticing her lingering near the piano. "Are you going to play, or just stare at it all day?" he asked, a teasing smile on his face. She hesitated, then nodded. I think I will," she said, her voice firmer than before. The manager chuckled. "All right, but make it quick. Don't slow down the service." She moved to the stool, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the customers might hear it. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering every lesson she had ever taken, every song she had ever practiced. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she reminded herself to breathe. The first note came out soft and clear. She played slowly at first, testing herself, feeling the piano respond to her touch. The music grew gradually, filling the restaurant with a gentle melody. Her customers began to notice. A few stopped mid-bite, watching her with curious eyes. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, listening to her play. Her confidence grew with each note. She remembered the patterns, the rhythm, the emotion that music could carry. She allowed herself to feel everything, the fear, the excitement, the joy. Each note was a step back into the world she had once loved. Suddenly, she became aware of a group of customers who had been mocking her in the past. They had returned for dinner, sitting near the front of the restaurant. They noticed her at the piano and began whispering to each other, smirking, assuming she would fail. She could feel their eyes on her, judging her silently. For a moment, fear threatened to stop her. She hesitated, her hands hovering over the keys. But then she remembered the applause from yesterday, the encouraging words of the elderly man, and the small spark inside her that refused to die. She pressed the keys firmly, letting the music flow freely. The song she chose was one she had loved as a child, simple yet full of emotion. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, bringing the melody to life. The mocking whispers slowly faded as the beauty of the music captured everyone's attention. Customers stopped talking. Waiters paused their work. And the group that had doubted her could only watch in stunned silence. Her music told a story without words. It spoke of longing, of dreams put aside, of hope rediscovered. The notes rose and fell like waves, carrying her emotions to everyone listening. Some customers had tears in their eyes. Some leaned forward, mesmerized by the skill and passion she displayed. The young diners who had mocked her earlier exchanged glances. Their smirks had disappeared, replaced by astonishment. One of them whispered, "I didn't know she could play like that." Another nodded, unable to speak. The laughter they had expected to hear never came. Instead, they felt something they had never anticipated. Respect. The manager came closer, leaning against a table. His eyes widened slightly as he watched her play. She's really good," he muttered under his breath. He had never seen her like this, never imagined that the quiet waitress who moved silently between tables had such a hidden talent. The elderly man smiled from his table, his eyes shining with pride. "I told you," he whispered to himself. "Talent never disappears." Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. She played with every ounce of emotion she had, letting the music tell her story. Each note was deliberate, yet full of life. She felt the energy of the room, the attention of the audience, and the thrill of finally stepping into her own power. When the last note faded, the restaurant remained silent for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, the applause began. One hand clapped, then another. The sound grew louder, spreading across the room. Customers rose from their chairs, clapping and cheering. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Some smiled broadly, unable to hide their amazement. The group that had mocked her before stood frozen, their mouths open in shock. They had expected failure, humiliation, laughter. Instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen a young woman rise above doubt and fear to reveal a hidden talent that could not be ignored. Her coworkers approached her slowly, with their expressions a mixture of surprise and admiration. That was incredible," one said. Another nodded, saying, "I had no idea you could play like that." Even the older waitress, who had warned her not to try, looked at her with newfound respect. She smiled softly, still catching her breath. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, feeling the last vibrations of the music. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of pride and joy that she had never known before. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly valued, truly alive. The applause continued as the manager approached. We should have known," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "You've been hiding this all this time?" She nodded, smiling. I didn't know if anyone would believe me." The elderly man leaned over from his table. "Now they believe," he said, his eyes twinkling. "And more importantly, you believe in yourself." As the restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, she realized something important. This moment was not just about playing the piano. It was about courage, about stepping into her own light despite fear and doubt. It was about showing the world who she truly was, not just the role she had been given as a waitress. Customers began asking if she would play again in the evenings. The manager suggested setting up a small schedule so she could perform regularly. Her coworkers began to treat her with more respect, recognizing that there was more to her than they had ever imagined. And she herself began to feel a spark of hope, a sense that her life could change in ways she had never dreamed possible. That night, she walked home slowly, the city lights reflecting in puddles on the street. She thought about the piano, the applause, and the expressions on the faces of those who had doubted her. A quiet smile spread across her face. She knew that the journey was only beginning. There would be challenges ahead, more doubts to face, more eyes to impress, and perhaps more mocking along the way. But she also knew this: she would never hide again. She would never let fear keep her from showing the world the talent and passion she carried inside. Every note she played, every song she learned, every performance she gave would be a step toward the life she had always wanted, the life she deserved. As she reached her small apartment, she paused for a moment, thinking about the elderly man's words. Talent never disappears, She repeated them to herself, letting the truth sink in. Her talent had been hidden, yes, but it had never left her. It had waited patiently, ready for the moment she was brave enough to claim it. She looked out of her window at the quiet streets below and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." And deep in her heart, she believed it. The restaurant, the piano, the customers, the mocking faces, they were all part of her story now. And she was ready to write the next chapter, one note at a time. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Her body felt tired from working long hours, but her heart was light, almost fluttering with excitement. Yesterday's performance had changed everything. The memory of the applause, the amazed faces, and the quiet pride she felt inside replayed over and over in her mind. She had touched something inside herself that could not be ignored. As she walked to the restaurant, the streets looked the same, narrow, worn, and busy, but everything felt different. She felt a new energy in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. The piano waited for her in its corner, silent and gleaming under the morning lights. She stopped for a moment and placed her hand on it, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. The piano had always been there, but now it seemed to watch her, as if aware of her growing confidence. The restaurant was busier than usual. Word had spread quickly about her performance the day before. Customers came in with curiosity shining in their eyes. Some had come to eat, but many had come to see the young waitress who had stunned everyone with her music. Her co-workers whispered, among themselves, glancing at her with awe and a hint of disbelief. She smiled politely, hiding her nervous excitement. She had no idea how this day would unfold. During the lunch rush, the group of young diners who had mocked her before returned. Their faces were familiar, and at first she felt a flicker of fear. They had smirked and whispered, expecting her to fail, and now they were back, sitting at a table near the piano. She could feel their eyes on her as she served other tables. She tried to ignore them, focusing on her work, but their presence made her pulse quicken. A few hours later, the restaurant had quieted. Some customers had left, and a few remained, sipping coffee or waiting for dessert. She glanced at the piano. Her fingers itched to play. She took a deep breath and walked slowly toward it. Trembled slightly as she sat down, but this time, something inside her was stronger. She remembered yesterday's applause and the elderly man's encouraging words. She could do this. The first notes came softly, almost hesitant, but gradually grew in strength. She played a piece she had memorized long ago, letting the music flow naturally. Her fingers moved with precision, her heart guiding every melody. The sound filled the room, creating a calm energy that contrasted with the usual chaos of the restaurant. The young diners who had mocked her earlier exchanged uneasy glances. Their whispers stopped. It expected failure, but what they saw was skill, confidence, and beauty. Their smirks vanished, replaced by astonishment. One of them muttered, She's amazing." Another nodded silently, unable to speak. Her co-workers watched in awe. Some had never seen her like this, never imagined that the quiet, diligent waitress they passed in the hallways could command such attention with music. The manager, who had been skeptical at first, leaned against a table, shaking his head in disbelief. "She's really talented," he muttered, almost to himself. As she continued playing, more customers began to notice. Conversations slowed, and heads turned toward the piano. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotion in her music. Others smiled, swaying slightly to the rhythm. Every note she played carried a story, a reflection of her struggles, her dreams, and the courage she had found within herself. The room seemed to hold its breath. She felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, knowing that everyone was watching her. But instead of feeling small, she felt empowered. Every note she played was a declaration of her worth, a reminder that she was more than the role assigned to her as a waitress. The elderly man who had encouraged her turned once again. He watched from his table, his eyes shining with pride. "See what I mean?" he whispered quietly to a nearby waiter. "She's incredible, and she's just getting started." The young diners who had mocked her earlier were now completely silent. They could not hide their surprise and admiration. One of them finally spoke, almost a whisper. I didn't expect that. She's really good." Another nodded, unable to find words. They had come to mock, but they were leaving with respect. Having witnessed a performance that touched something deeper than skill, it touched the heart. Her music carried on, filling every corner of the restaurant. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but because it felt like breathing. Each note was a release of years of fear, doubt, and silence. She remembered the lonely nights, when she had imagined herself playing, the quiet moments when she had touched the piano at home and dreamed of this very day. Now it was real. Time seemed to stand still. Customers put down their forks, cups, and phones. Even the kitchen staff paused to listen. The melody spoke for her, telling the story of a young woman who had been underestimated, mocked, and doubted, yet had found the courage to rise above it all. As she reached the final notes, the room erupted in applause. Hands clapped, cheers echoed, and a few people even stood, unable to contain their excitement. The young diners who had doubted her looked at each other, their faces flushed with embarrassment. They had expected failure and ridicule, but instead, they had witnessed talent, passion, and courage. Her coworkers approached her slowly, their expressions a mixture of awe and admiration. That was incredible, one said. Another added, I never knew you could play like that. You're amazing. Even the older waitress who had warned her not to try looked at her with newfound respect. She smiled softly, feeling her chest swell with pride and joy. She had done it. Mocked face, fear, mocked faces, and doubt, and she had played anyway. The music was hers, and she had shared it with the world on her own terms. The manager came forward, shaking his head in disbelief. We should have realized sooner. You've been hiding this talent all this time? She nodded quietly, smiling. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. The elderly man leaned over from his table, his eyes twinkling. Now they believe, he said softly. And more importantly, you believe in yourself. Word of her talent spread quickly. Customers began asking if she would play again, some returning specifically to hear her. The manager suggested setting up regular music nights, giving her a chance to perform for everyone in the restaurant. Her coworkers treated her differently. Now, recognizing the depth of her skill and the strength of her courage, that evening, after the restaurant had quieted, she walked home slowly, thinking about everything that had happened. She could still hear the applause, the amazement in the customers' voices, and the astonishment on the faces of those who had doubted her. A quiet smile spread across her face. She had faced the fear, and the world had seen her for who she truly was. She knew that more challenges would come. There would be more doubt, more judgment, and perhaps more mocking along the way. She also knew that she had found something inside herself that could not be silenced: her music, her courage, and her voice. As she looked out of her window that night, city lights reflecting softly in the streets below, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." She knew it was true. Her life was changing, and each note she played was a step toward the future she had always dreamed of. The piano in the restaurant had become more than just an instrument. It was a doorway, a challenge, and a promise. And she was ready to step through it, knowing that she had the courage, the skill, and the heart to face whatever came next. The applause, the admiration, and the astonishment of those who had once mocked her were not the end. They were the beginning of something far greater. She had discovered her true power, and nothing could take it away. And in that moment, she realized that her journey was not just about music. It was about believing in herself, rising above fear, and showing the world that hidden talent could shine, even from the most unexpected places. The restaurant lights dimmed. The city settled into quiet night, and she smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to share her gift. She had found her voice, and she would never let it be silenced again. The world had started to see her. She had started to see herself, and that was only the beginning. The next morning, she woke up with a quiet excitement that filled her chest. The past few days had been overwhelming, but in the best way. Her life had begun to change, and she could feel it. For the first time in years, she felt that the world was full of possibilities, not just the limits she had grown used to. The piano in the restaurant no longer felt like just an object. It was a symbol of what she could achieve if she dared to believe in herself. She walked to the restaurant, her steps lighter than usual. People on the street seemed the same, yet she noticed everything differently now. The small shops, the children playing in the alleys, the sound of the wind against the buildings all seemed alive with energy. It reminded her that life could surprise you when you least expected it. When she entered the restaurant, the piano gleamed in the morning light. She paused for a moment and placed her hand on it, feeling the familiar smooth surface. Her fingers tingled. Today, she felt ready to take another step, to do more than just play for a few customers. She wanted to share her music fully, without hesitation, without fear. The restaurant was already busy. Word had spread about her talent, and many customers had come specifically to see her play. Some were returning from previous days, their faces showing anticipation and excitement. Others were new, curious about the young waitress who had captured the attention of so many.